And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Welcome back to the TMCJ podcast. We are on episode 85. And, full disclosure, I'm alone this week. There's no Blue Bear. For a little background information, he had his computer. He wanted to upgrade it. And it bricked. So he couldn't turn it on, wouldn't connect to the monitor, wouldn't connect to anything. Spent some time trying to troubleshoot the thing with him, and just didn't work. So we ordered a new one, but the new computer is not back yet, so just me. This podcast is probably going to be a lot shorter than one of the more typical ones, because, frankly, it's just going to be me talking to myself. This is going to be an exercise in seeing how long I can actually talk to myself. So bear with me. But that's the disclaimer. You've been warned up front. Basically, what I think this is going to be is an extended segment 1. I'm going to be talking about... There's not going to be a segment 3. Because, I mean, the wild card is that I'm here on my own without Blue. So I've got a few topics, a few things that I figured might be interesting to talk about. Something I could rhapsodize on a little bit without somebody to bounce ideas off of or provide counterpoints, counter commentary, react to what I'm saying. All right, that's enough waffling though. I wanted to start off with one of the biggest stories that's been happening this past week, 2 weeks now since the last podcast went out. And we kind of provided a bit of an update on this at the time. We had talked about how the whole thing with Elon Musk buying bits and pieces of Twitter and then potentially joining the board and then not joining the board, but then potentially buying more of the company and then making an offer for it. Well, all of that came to a head in the meantime, and they accepted. He made a big offer. He tried some interesting tactics. They were going to do this thing, I guess it's called a poison pill. Basically, if somebody is about to take a large interest in the company, once they pass a certain threshold, the existing shareholders, or the board, I guess, are able to issue new stock, essentially devaluing all existing stock, and then making it more difficult for somebody to buy a controlling interest in the company. That didn't happen because Elon was considering, I guess, what's called a tender offer. I don't know enough about stock trading to say any of this like with any degree of authority, but this is what I've read, which would have been him going directly to key shareholders, some of which were like big banks and stuff like that, which stood to make a lot of money if this deal went through, and thereby circumventing the rule where if he bought too much of the stock, they were allowed to do that. He could just buy directly from people who were eager to sell to him at the rate he quoted. And it all culminated in the deal happening. He bought it. And people are like going nuts about it. Or at least Twitter employees are going nuts about it. All kinds of crazy stuff has been happening on Twitter itself from what I've heard. This is, again, all second and third hand because I don't use social media. I mean, aside from YouTube, if you count YouTube. No. I had a Twitter account once. I used it for about 6 months and became significantly less productive in that time. It was way too easy to just scroll and look at funny memes for an hour. I can only imagine what happens to people that use TikTok. But that happened. People are melting down, complaining to the company. Some of the weird stuff that I've heard is happening is like people who have accused Twitter of kind of shadow banning them and stuff like that, suddenly find people able to see their posts, suddenly start gaining followers. Other people have, thrown a temper tantrum and said, oh, we're going to leave the platform. We're going to get off here. And then they don't. I feel like this is, and I've heard somebody else say this, so I'm stealing this quote. But the whole, I'm leaving Twitter because Elon Musk bought it is the, I'm moving to Canada because the person I don't like got elected. Yeah, it's just been very amusing to me. I'm considering remaking an account, or maybe using the TMCJ podcast account that we have more actively. Maybe if it's a more well-run platform, it'll actually be something that is beneficial to the channel, to the podcast. We'll see. But yeah, just an update on there. I think the final price that he paid like $45 billion for it. which is something like a fifth of his worth. So, yeah, it's a crazy roller coaster. And Elon Musk, basically, he strikes me as like he's almost become like a Tony Stark figure. Like, he is Iron Man, except if he liked memes and was a bit more of a troll. Like, he owns one of the biggest electric car companies in the world, one of the most successful ones. He owns a spaceship company that has pioneered all kinds of new rocket technology. And then he decides to use his enormous wealth just to mess with people. Although he does make good points that, he's Twitter is definitely not what it used to be. Again, I'm speaking secondhand since I never really used it. But from what I've been told, it used to be a much more engaging, much more chaotic platform. Probably a lot more fun, too. I don't know. I miss the old days of the internet. Facebook had just came out when I went to college for the first time. And I remember what it was like. It was a really a lot more of a clunky site back then, but it was a lot more of a fun environment. Like, I miss the old days of the internet where you could it was just a bunch of people trolling and shit talking each other. It was like the Wild West. And there were good parts of it and bad parts of it. I personally enjoyed like the banter and the back and forth. The early days of like Xbox Live, like, I really enjoyed that. I met a lot of people on there, some of which have been, friends of mine for decades now. And back then there was no going into private chats. There was no, and not only that, most games had like proximity voice, so you could hear everyone in the game, whether you're your opponent or not. And it was just awesome. But yeah, I don't think we'll get back to that state at any point, or that Twitter's going to turn into that. Although if it did, I probably would make an account. Yeah, there's not really much else I can say about that, because I don't really know too much else about it. I just wanted to update it since it was a topic that we talked about on the podcast. Let's see here. What else have I been doing this week? I've been trying to play a little bit more on my Xbox after work. Mainly because... Oh, you know what? I won't talk about that yet. I've been playing through Ark Survival Evolved. For those that don't know, it is an open world survival game. Got all the classic stuff about that. You can craft things, learn new recipes, build a base, do all that fun stuff, gather resources. And except the twist is it's like on a prehistoric island, so there's dinosaurs everywhere, and you can tame the dinosaurs and, ride them. I spent a good chunk of last weekend flying around on a pterodactyl that I'd named Flying Bitch, just roaming and hunting and exploring new lands. Yeah, fun game. And I think by the end of it, on one island, we had the server I was playing on, they had significantly reduced the amount of time it took to tame something or to level up. So we were able to get up in technology very quickly, and we were able to tame a lot of dinosaurs very quickly. So we had a few Triceratopses, some Stegosauruses? How do you say that? Quite a few pterodactyls. Don't know if we ever got any of the bigger ones, like the T-Rexes, the Brontosauruses, or if you can even get them. But I remember hearing a lot about that game back in the day, like back in 2017. That's when I picked the game up and haven't really touched it since then. But some of the servers I saw back then, like, it was a significant amount of time. So you had people who would play, thousands of hours, and they would, it'd be a huge achievement to tame one dinosaur. I feel like it gave you a lot of investment in it. It's like, you don't want the dinosaur to die. It's like a big thing. You don't want to risk it. But it also means that you've got a huge leg up on the other people on the server because you got a dinosaur. And that's a massive jump in technology. I remember watching videos of people on servers where they had different tribes. and like, you know, the tribes that with some of the tribes were able to tech up, like they grinded a lot and they teched up to guns and they became some of the bigger tribes. And then there were other tribes that made political alliances against them. I love games where stuff like that happens. A few years back, in fact, I hosted a Factorio server, and we had 7 people in the server, I want to say. Yeah. And what we ended up doing, what we actually ended up becoming factions unto ourselves. So there was the northern faction, the central faction, and the southern faction. And the southern faction was the blueprint faction. Like the rest of us liked, you know, organically growing our factories. People in the south, they were like hardcore into blueprints, and a war started between the central and southern factions because the blueprint faction in the south had built over some of the central faction's buildings and basically like, oh, this is all messy, cleared it out and stamped the blueprint on it. They didn't like that. And so they ended up basically sabotaging each other's buildings, blowing up power lines, cutting them off when like the monsters in the game would come by. But my faction, the northern faction, ended up being able to stay completely neutral in the conflict because we were the ones that manufactured all of the bullets. Both factions had to come to us for ammo, and we were the ones keeping the massive like enemy alien bug bases to the north out of everyone else's hair. So it's crazy how stuff like that can develop organically in those kinds of games. Like once you add a multiplayer element and enough freedom, like crazy things, you'd see this stuff in like Minecraft servers too, although to a lesser extent, I think. And you really need the right group for that to actually develop. Some people don't find that sort of thing fun at all. They just want to build their little thing, and they don't want to be disturbed. Those are the people you see on the beach who build these giant, elaborate sand castles, and then they weep if a small child runs into it and destroys it. I shouldn't be laughing, but I don't know. There is something that I find intrinsically funny about people getting trolled. Maybe not so much when I get trolled. But that's the price you pay. All right. That's me talking about Ark. But there was something else. Oh, right. Yeah, Xbox. I have the Xbox Game Pass, which I don't use it enough for how much it costs, which I guess is probably the point and why Microsoft put it out. But every now and again, I'll see a game and see that it's free because I have the pass and think, you know what, I'm going to use this thing. I'm actually going to try it out. This week I've been playing an indie game, and I did record a good chunk of it, so I might end up using it for a future video. But it's called Chinatown Detective Agency. It's set in Singapore in like 2050 something or 2030 something. And as far as I can tell, it's like, you know, a somewhat dystopian cyberpunk future. I haven't really gauged the level of dystopia yet. It seems like one of the biggest things is like it takes place in Singapore, and you do go to other parts of the world. The game opens up with a guy getting blown up by a robot bird that's like a bomber. And then you play as this detective woman who owns her own private detective agency. She goes and solves cases. I think she gets involved very early on with like this cabal of the upper elite in Singapore, and they put her on a case to hunt down this guy who's kind of skipped the country. I enjoy the aesthetic of it. It's 8-bit kind of look to it. So kind of low res polygonal graphics, or no, not polygon, low res like 2D kind of graphics. It has a very 90s adventure game kind of interface where you've got, you know, your different menus. You can open up a map. You click on things in the screen to, well, you don't click on it. You walk over to it, press the A button on the Xbox. The one thing I didn't like about it, I don't like, if I don't have to, looking up a guide for a game. I feel like in most games, especially ones that have puzzles, if I have to look up a guide, I've failed. Right? I feel like I'm cheating. I feel like I've failed. I should have figured it out myself. What I didn't know, and this is something I think it takes from the whole adventure game feel where it was like extremely difficult and there were some stupid puzzles on them. There are things that the game expects you to tab out and open up an internet browser and look it up. I spent probably 40 minutes trying to solve a riddle. There was a person who had disappeared. I had to find a book they had checked out of the library, and all I had was a quote. And the quote, I can't remember it off the top of my head. It was something like, of all men's miseries, the worst is knowing that he controls nothing, or is to know so much and yet have control over nothing. Something like that. So I'm looking everywhere. I'm like, okay, I got the guy's name. I got the quote. Maybe his name's in the directory, and the directory I was looking at was a list of, I guess, probably Patreon supporters or GoFundMe supporters or whatever. Couldn't find it. Eventually, I broke down, pulled out my tablet, and I didn't look up the solution to the puzzle. I looked up, how am I supposed to find this? And I found an article written about this, and I wish I could remember what site it was on so I could give credit. But they were talking, they said that one of their biggest frustrations is that the game intends you to tab out and look things up for these puzzles. Like, you're not supposed to find them the solutions aren't in the game. The solutions are on the internet. And while it's kind of the cynical side of me is like, okay, they saved some budget by doing that. But maybe it's more of a, like, they felt that they didn't need to. People are going to tab out and be able to look it up anyway. It was annoying. Anyway, that quote is from Herodotus. And so I was able to use that to put in that keyword and then pull up the book that was they had on file related to Herodotus, and that gives the next puzzle. There's another thing later where when I finally solve a cipher, they give you a hint and it's a location, and they tell you 3 possible things that location could be. And you either have to have the knowledge of, what the alternate name for one of those places is, or you have to look it up, like I did, because I'd never heard the word before. So it's now that I know that, I'm enjoying the game a bit more, but it was a very frustrating, 30 or 40 minutes just scrolling through this list. Like, am I just blind? Am I missing the name? Talking to everyone in the town. Costs $2 to use the subway in that game, so I'm spending a ton of money going to all the different locations. Yeah. I probably should have. Well, you know what? An old adventure game back in the 90s would have come with an instruction book, and that instruction book would have said, "Hey, look it up in a dictionary, dumbass," or "Hey, look it up online," for the modern day. But yeah, overall, it seems like a good game. I like the aesthetic. It has voice acting. It's a little amateurish, but for what it is, it's good. Like, the people doing the voice acting clearly were putting some effort into it. And some of them, there's only a couple areas where you're like, okay, this is not like the most professional either voice actor or person directing the voice actor, but they're not it's not bad voice acting. It's just not AAA perfect. Although I say that some AAA games have some very boring voice acting. You can clearly tell the person is just there for a paycheck, and they're just essentially reading the dialogue off a list. But oh well. Been having fun with it. Really liked it. Actually, this is a good point to transition into. No. I'm gonna keep on gaming for a little bit. So, I talked about on the podcast a couple weeks back how I've been replaying Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time on the Switch and I found out there's a reason that I was able to get the N64 thing. There's actually you have to buy the Nintendo Online expansion pack, which for an individual, I believe, is $40 or $50 a year. And then for a family plan, it's like $80 a year. What I had forgotten is that one of my college buddies, he wanted to buy one, and he was going to share keys with him, his wife, and his brother. Now, the thing is, when you buy the family plan, it's $80. So, again, it's more expensive, but you get 8 keys. You can attach it to 8 accounts. Well, he only had 3 people to give it to. So it wouldn't have been worth it to buy 2 of the normal one. So he had 5 extra ones. So he just asked the rest of us, hey, do you want these? And I've been on his account ever since. I need to thank him more often for that. Yeah, playing through the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, I beat it this past week. And it was interesting. Right up until the end, I remembered most of what I was doing. Because I'd played through the original one, and I beat it when I was pretty young. Pretty soon after it came out. And then I beat most of it on the 3DS. And then I beat part of it again, like on the GameCube, when I got they released it along with Master Quest on the GameCube. So I've beaten a good chunk of the game, but I've never gotten 100% of the way through it. Like all the way, beat the final boss, saw the ending cutscene. I'm pretty sure I've only done that once, maybe twice, and I was very young. So it was the first time I'd done that in a while. And pretty much up until the end when I went into Ganon's castle and, did all the little sub temples inside there and unlocked things and then went up and did the final boss fight. There were a few things where I could not for the life of me remember what I was supposed to be doing. For instance, in the final boss when you're fighting Ganondorf, he's throwing light balls at you. I knew you had to use your sword to reflect the ball back at him and hit him with it. What I forgot was that once I did that, I had to shoot him with a light arrow. And I had a very small window to do it in. So it took me a little bit to get back to it. But I was surprised exactly how much of the game I remembered and was able to solve without... I think I only had to pull up a guide and look up things once or twice. Once was to try and figure out how I was supposed to get into Mount Doom from the Gerudo City, or Goron City. And another one was when I was trying to find... Oh, what was it? There was a heart piece or... heart piece or a skeleton, or gold skeleton. And I don't remember which one it was, but I knew roughly where it was, and I just could not find it. But it was a lot of fun. It was good going back to that and actually completing the game again, because it's been at least 2 decades since I've beat it the whole way through. Just that's that. The thing I was going to transition to talking about and going to go into a little bit is novels, writing in particular. Well, ways that stories are written that either do or don't work. And I'm, again, by no means an expert on this. I have written quite a bit, but I've never actually finished a book. So there's my credentials. But recently, and this is something we're going to be talking about on the next podcast when Blue's available to record, there's a book that he's had me reading called Blind Faith by Ben Elton. And I won't give away most of my opinions on that, but one thing I will say is the book does tend to have a bit excessive dialogue, which wasn't too bad. I was listening to it in an audiobook, and, whatever, it's fine. It was definitely readable. The story was good, and I was entertained. Now, there's another book that I picked up from a bookstore nearby, and the book is called... the book series, and this is what kind of drew me to it. It looked short, and it looked interesting. The book was called... The series is called The Murderbot Diaries, which is kind of a hilarious name. And the idea is a AI becomes, like, self-aware, and it decides it's perfectly peaceful. It decides it wants to help humans and help people or something like. At least that's what the blurb on the back of the book said. But it decides to name itself Murderbot, and I haven't gotten far enough into it to actually see if it'll ever catch me. And this is the reason: the writing style in this book is just, for me at least, atrocious. Every sentence is like broken up by an inner monologue. So the robot will be, monologuing about something, and then there'll be like a random parenthesis where it'll say something that it sounds like something a snarky teenager would say. It's like, I don't understand why humans do this, in parentheses, lol humans, or something like that. It's not that bad, but it's close to that bad. I got through the first chapter of the book that I bought. So I have the first book. I haven't started that one. And I have a standalone short story that's written in the same, not short story, but a standalone novel that's written in the same universe. You're supposed to be able to read it with just basically knowing the premise. And reading through that one, it was a slog to get through the first 2 chapters. And like I had to force myself. I was like, I bought this book. I am going to read through it. I'm at least going to get partway through it. But the dialogue, the inner monologue, and the writing style was just grating. And that might just be me. So it just, yeah. I don't know why I brought that up. Just something to complain about, I guess. And then part of this, I think, might be a bit spoiled, maybe. Some books I've gone back to when I was no, because you know what? When I was a kid, one of my favorite book series was Animorphs. Loved that series. The same author, K.A. Applegate, she released another book series following that one that was kind of more for like the young adult teenager kind of crowd, and it was called Everworld. Animorphs, for those who don't know, book series about these teenage kids. They're cutting through a construction site, coming home from the mall one night, and they find a crashed alien spaceship. There's a dying alien there, and he gives them this power, this technology that allows them to acquire DNA from animals that they are able to touch, and then they can transform into that animal for 2 hours before they have to transform back to their human form. And then they find out that there's another alien race that's on Earth that's slowly infecting people. They can control people's minds and essentially enslave them. And the book series went on for like 50 books. I remember a few years back going back and reading, because they're short books, rereading just a couple of them. I mean, it's clearly meant for a younger audience, but I was still able to, like, it flowed smoothly. The dialogue seemed natural. The descriptive language seemed natural and like, it didn't constantly pull me out of the action because it had a weird non sequitur sentence or something like that. Same thing, and to a lesser extent, I tried reading the first book of the other series that K. Applegate wrote, the Everspace one. She had 3 series that I read when I was a kid. The other one was called Remnants, and it was about like the last vestiges of humanity that barely get off the planet before a meteor strikes and blows up Earth. Which, interesting concept, and I did enjoy that one, but it kind of petered off at one point. I don't know if she stopped writing it, or if I just moved on to something else, because this was kind of like my early teens when that one was coming out. Anyway, the Everspace one, I went back, and again, clearly made for a young audience, but not as young as the other ones, and but well written. Again, dialogue flowed kind of naturally. The descriptive scenes, it all felt coherent and smooth. So just the writing style, even if you have a great concept for a story, writing style really means a lot. And I think that's a lesson that I was taught the hard way, reading these books fairly recently. And in fact, I haven't picked that book up again. It's been like a month since I touched it. I've been moving on. I've been rereading the Song of Ice and Fire, or Game of Thrones series, as most people will call it now. A book series that, as much as I'm glad that the author made bank selling it to HBO and doing the TV show and whatnot, I am just really, really afraid that he's not going to be able to finish that series, or that he just won't. Because that's a series that's been with me since I was like 12. There were only 2 books out when I started reading it, and the 3rd one came out when I went to high school, 4th one came out when I went to college, 5th one came out when I graduated college, and it's been a drought since then. It's been 11 years since the last book came out. 11 years! Yeah. I'm really afraid. That's not the only series that's happened to me with. Another book series, Patrick Rothfuss, the author, he wrote the series Kingkiller Chronicles. And it's another fantasy series. It's meant to be a trilogy. So first book, Name of the Wind. Second book, A Wise Man's Fear. The third book was supposed to be called The Doors of Stone. And from what I've heard, the book is written. The book, he's posted pictures of the manuscript. I think he published like the first chapter online. But he still hasn't. It's another one it's been like 10 years again. I think A Wise Man's Fear came out in 2011 or 2012. And I've reread that series a few times too, to the point where I think I've got a good idea where he's going with the plot and probably where it's going to end. But he just hasn't finished it. And in his case, he's got the damn book written. He just needs to just wipe his hands of it. He's going for perfection. Never go for perfection. It's never going to be perfect. Get the story to the point where it's good. Give it to an editor. Publish the damn thing. I mean, don't put it out like half finished. Make sure you've got a good, coherent story. Have a few, test readers, but stop tweaking it. Finish it, and just let it go. Doors of Stone. I'm gonna look this up and see. He released the prologue in December, so that's the more recent thing. Patrick Rothfuss' Doors of Stone is expected to release on the 11th of July, 2022. Huh. He might finally release the damn book. What a fucking shock. Oh my god. Okay. Do I have anything else to talk about? That's the question I have to ask myself now. What else have I been doing this week? Played a game about... Nope, that's not interesting. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say. I guess, so the question I asked myself at the beginning of this podcast was, how long can I talk to myself realistically? And the answer, it appears, is 32 minutes. So, that mystery has been solved. It's another one I can scratch off the bucket list. If I practice, I imagine I can probably talk to myself for longer. But that's not going to happen today. Like I said, this was going to be a shorter form podcast in general. I can't quiz myself for segment 3. I can't play these fun little games. I can't time myself trying to describe something that I ask myself to describe. As funny as that would actually be for me to try and play both me and Blue, it's not going to work. So you're only getting topics this week. But hopefully it wasn't too boring. And if you honestly, if you listened this long, more power to you and thank you. But this is going to be the end of this very odd episode of the TMCJ podcast and end of episode 85. Thank you all for listening, and you will hear us again 2 weeks for episode 86.